The chilly November breeze rustled through the trees as Maya stared at her phone, reading the text message for what felt like the 100th time. Her fingers hovered over the screen, heart beating a little faster as she processed the words. Mom's expecting us at 4 p.m. sharp for Thanksgiving dinner. Everyone's excited to finally meet you. 2 years. That's how long she'd been dating James, and somehow, she'd managed to miss every single family gathering. First, it was a work emergency in Chicago. Then, her sister's destination wedding in the Caribbean. Last Christmas, she'd caught that awful flu going around the office. But now, there were no more excuses left. Maya sank deeper into her office chair, spinning slowly as she gazed out the window of her corner office. The marketing proposals on her desk could wait. Right now, her mind was racing with thoughts about finally meeting James's family. She'd seen the photos, heard the stories, and even had a few FaceTime conversations with his mom, Barbara. But this was different. This was real. Girl, you're overthinking again. Her best friend's voice echoed in her head from their conversation last night. You're a whole marketing executive. You present to boardrooms full of stuffy old men every week. This is just dinner. But it wasn't just dinner, and Maya knew it. This was about belonging, about fitting into a world that sometimes felt like it was designed to keep her out. She'd been here before, the only black person at the table, navigating the delicate dance of being herself while making others feel comfortable. The ping of a new email snapped her back to reality. Another message from James. B2Go, Mom's going all out with the menu. She's even attempting her first Southern-style mac and cheese. A small smile crept across Maya's face as she read the message. That's when inspiration struck. Her grandmother's sweet potato pie recipe, the one that had won the church baking contest 3 years running, the one that made even her pickiest little cousins beg for seconds. That would be her contribution to the dinner. Opening her desk drawer, Maya pulled out the small, worn recipe book her grandmother had given her when she graduated college. The pages were yellow with age, some corners dog-eared, with handwritten notes squeezed into the margins. As she flipped to the familiar page, a sticky note fell out. Her grandmother's elegant handwriting reminding her about the secret ingredient. A pinch of nutmeg makes them remember you. Maya chuckled at the note, remembering how her grandmother always said food was the fastest way to make strangers feel like family. Maybe that's what this dinner needed, a taste of her family's traditions, a piece of her history to share with James' people. Pulling up her calendar, she blocked off Wednesday evening for baking. Between the quarterly reports and client meetings, she'd make time to perfect this pie. It had to be just right, not too sweet, with that perfect blend of spices that made people close their eyes and smile with the first bite. As she closed the recipe book, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a photo from James, his mother rearranging the dining room for the 20th time, making sure everything would be perfect. The caption read, "She's already stress cleaning the good china." Maya zoomed in on the photo, taking in the details of the elegant suburban home, the crystal chandelier, the antique furniture, the family portraits lining the walls. It was beautiful, but it also felt like a world away from the cozy chaos of her own family's gatherings, where paper plates were perfectly acceptable and nobody cared if the tablecloth matched the napkins. Standing up to stretch, Maya caught her reflection in the office window. She adjusted her blazer and straightened her shoulders the way she always did before important meetings. "You've got this," she whispered to herself, channeling the confidence that had earned her this corner office before age 30. It's just dinner. But deep down, as she returned to her desk and tried to focus on work, Maya knew this dinner would be more than just a meal. It would be the first chapter of a new story, one she hoped would have a happy ending. Maya's kitchen filled with the warm, sweet scent of baking as she carefully measured out the spices for her grandmother's sweet potato pie. The Wednesday evening light filtered through her apartment windows, casting long shadows across her countertops covered in flour and measuring cups. A pinch of nutmeg, not a spoonful, she mumbled to herself, hearing her grandmother's voice in her head. The old recipe book lay open nearby, its pages protected by a sheet of clear plastic wrap to guard against any spills. Maya had already called her grandmother twice that evening, just to double-check the little details that weren't written down. "Baby," her grandmother had said during their last call, "you're not just making a pie. You're sharing our history. Every time I make this recipe, I think about your great-grandmother teaching it to me in her tiny kitchen back in Georgia. Now it's your turn to pass it on." The sweet potatoes were already cooling on the counter, their orange flesh perfectly tender. Maya had picked them out carefully at the farmer's market that morning, choosing ones that were just the right size. The older lady at the market stand had nodded approvingly at her selections, sharing her own tips about picking the best ones for baking. As Maya began mashing the sweet potatoes, her phone lit up with a text from James. "Everything okay? You've been pretty quiet today." She smiled, typing back with her clean hand. "Just channeling my inner chef. Your family's about to taste the best sweet potato pie of their lives." The truth was, she'd been nervous all day. During her lunch break, she'd changed her outfit choice for tomorrow 3 times. Should she wear the blue dress that always got her compliments at work, or go more casual with slacks and a sweater? Would her natural hair be too much, or should she straighten it? Every choice felt loaded with meaning. Her best friend had finally talked her down during their afternoon coffee break. "Wear whatever makes you feel like yourself," she'd said. "If they're going to judge you, they'll do it no matter what you're wearing. Besides, once they taste your cooking, nothing else will matter." Maya hummed to herself as she mixed the filling, adding each ingredient with careful precision. The rhythm of baking helped calm her nerves. There was something soothing about following these steps that had been passed down through generations. Eggs, butter, milk, sugar, and those special spices her grandmother swore made all the difference. The pie crust had given her some trouble earlier. The first attempt had torn while she was transferring it to the pan. The second one had turned out better, its edges crimped in the wavy pattern her grandmother had taught her. "Presentation matters," she could hear her grandmother saying, "but love matters more." As she poured the filling into the crust, Maya thought about all the family gatherings where this pie had been the star of the dessert table. She remembered helping her grandmother make it as a child, standing on a chair to reach the counter, her small hands covered in flour. Now here she was, making it for a different kind of family gathering. The timer on her oven beeped, signaling it was fully preheated. Before sliding the pie in, Maya paused. This wasn't just about impressing James's family. It was about bringing a piece of herself, her family, and her traditions to their table. Whether they appreciated it or not, she would know she'd put her heart into it. As the pie baked, filling her apartment with its sweet aroma, Maya cleaned up her kitchen and packed her work bag for tomorrow. She'd taken the morning off to make sure everything would be perfect for the afternoon dinner. James had offered to pick her up early so they could arrive together. Finally, the timer chimed. Maya opened the oven door, and her heart swelled with pride. The pie was perfect, golden brown on top, with just the right amount of gloss. As it cooled on the rack, she snapped a picture to send to her grandmother. The response came quickly. "Beautiful, baby, just like my mama used to make. Now go show them what our family's made of." Maya smiled, feeling a surge of confidence. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring, but at least she knew this pie would taste like home. The drive to James's parents' house felt longer than the actual 30 minutes it took. Maya sat in the passenger seat, carefully balancing her sweet potato pie on her lap. Every time James hit a small bump in the road, her heart jumped a little. The pie had turned out perfect. She wasn't about to let it get ruined now. "You're quiet," James said, glancing over at her as they turned into his parents' neighborhood. The houses here were all big and beautiful, with perfectly manicured lawns and luxury cars in the driveways. Maya watched them pass by, one after another, each seeming grander than the last. "Just taking it all in," she replied, trying to keep her voice light. She hadn't told James about the butterflies doing somersaults in her stomach. He was so excited about this dinner, about finally having all the people he loved in one room. The GPS announced their arrival, though they hardly needed it. James's childhood home stood out with its impressive stone facade and giant oak trees in the front yard. Several cars were already parked in the circular driveway. It looked like they were among the last to arrive. "That's Uncle Rick's BMW," James pointed out as they parked. "And that's Aunt Linda's new SUV. Look, even Cousin Pete made it from Boston." His excitement was contagious, and Maya found herself smiling despite her nerves. As they walked up the cobblestone path to the front door, Maya could hear laughter and conversation spilling out from inside. She adjusted her dress, she'd gone with the blue one after all, and took a deep breath. James balanced her work bag and the bottle of wine they'd brought, while she kept a firm grip on her pie. Before they could ring the doorbell, the door swung open. Barbara, James's mother, stood there in an elegant cream sweater and pearls, her face lit up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're here," she exclaimed, pulling James in for a one-armed hug. "And Maya, dear, so wonderful to finally meet you in person." The hug Barbara gave Maya was quick and stiff, nothing like the warm embraces Maya was used to from her own family. "Thank you for having me," Maya said, keeping her voice steady. "I brought a sweet potato pie for dessert. It's my grandmother's recipe." "Oh, how thoughtful," Barbara replied, her smile tightening slightly. "You can put that in the kitchen. We already have quite a spread of desserts, but I'm sure we can find room somewhere." The inside of the house was even more impressive than the outside. A crystal chandelier hung in the foyer, and Maya could see the dining room table already set with what looked like antique china. Family photos lined the walls, generations of James's family smiling down at them. Maya couldn't help but notice that everyone in the photos looked very much alike. As they followed Barbara through the house, various relatives looked up from their conversations. The room didn't exactly go quiet, but there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Maya felt the weight of their stares, some curious, some evaluating, a few openly disapproving. "Everyone, this is Maya," James announced proudly, his hand finding the small of her back. A chorus of hellos followed, some warmer than others. His younger cousin immediately bounded over, full of genuine enthusiasm, while his Aunt Linda merely nodded from across the room. In the kitchen, Maya found herself carefully placing her pie among an impressive array of desserts. There was a professional-looking apple pie, what appeared to be a homemade cheesecake, and several other traditional Thanksgiving offerings. Her pie, with its deep orange filling and home-style crust, stood out among them. "Oh, is that something ethnic?" one of James's aunts asked, peering at the pie with poorly concealed suspicion. Before Maya could respond, James jumped in. "It's a family recipe," he said firmly. "Maya's grandmother is famous for it." The aunt made a non-committal sound and drifted away. Maya busied herself with arranging the pie just so, giving her hand something to do. She could feel Barbara watching her from across the kitchen as she directed various relatives in their dinner preparations. Just then, James's teenage cousin peeked into the kitchen. "Is that sweet potato pie?" she asked, her eyes lighting up. "My friend's mom makes that sometimes. It's amazing." The genuine excitement in her voice was like a small ray of sunshine breaking through clouds. Maya smiled, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. Maybe, just maybe, this evening wouldn't be as hard as she'd feared. At least someone in the family seemed eager to try her contribution to the dinner. Dinner started promptly at 4, with everyone gathering around the massive oak dining table. Maya found herself seated between James and his teenage cousin, with Barbara directly across from her. The table settings looked like something out of a magazine. Crystal glasses catching the light from the chandelier, perfectly pressed napkins, and more forks than Maya had ever seen at one place setting. "So, Maya," Barbara began, passing a bowl of mashed potatoes, James tells us you work in marketing. The way she said it made it sound almost like a question, as if she doubted it could be true. Yes, I'm an executive director at Reynolds and Shaw, Maya replied, keeping her voice steady and professional, the same tone she used in board meetings. I oversee our international campaigns. Oh my, one of James's aunts chimed in, her eyebrows rising slightly. How surprising. You must be very articulate in your presentations. The underlying meaning wasn't lost on Maya. She'd heard comments like this throughout her career. James, busy serving himself turkey, seemed oblivious to the undertone. Maya just landed a huge account last month, he said proudly. Tell him about it, honey. Before Maya could speak, another relative jumped in. I have to ask, and I hope this isn't offensive, but is your hair natural? It's just so interesting. The woman reached across the table as if to touch Maya's hair, but thankfully couldn't quite reach. Maya instinctively leaned back slightly, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. She'd prepared herself for comments like this, but it still felt like a small punch to the gut. Yes, it is, she answered simply, trying to keep her voice light. I've worn it natural for about 5 years now. That must be so convenient, Barbara added with a tight smile. I spend hours at the salon every month with my hair. The conversation shifted then to whether Barbara should try a new hairstylist, giving Maya a moment to breathe. She felt James's hand squeeze her knee under the table. Had he finally noticed the awkwardness? But when she glanced at him, he was already engaged in a conversation with his uncle about football. I think your hair is beautiful, James's teenage cousin whispered beside her. My best friend at school has hair like yours. She taught me about protective styles and everything. Maya smiled genuinely for the first time since sitting down. Thank you, she whispered back. At least someone at the table made her feel normal. The questions continued throughout dinner, each one carrying its own weight of assumptions. Where was she really from? Philadelphia, though they kept pressing for somewhere more exotic. Did she grow up in the city? Actually, in a suburban home not unlike this one. Did she know how to make soul food? She could cook many things, including, but not limited to soul food. Every answer felt like walking a tightrope. Be honest, but not confrontational, educational, but not condescending, friendly, but not too casual. It was exhausting, but Maya had years of practice at navigating these waters. Maya grew up not far from here. James offered between bites of turkey. Her parents live in the Oak Hills area now. Oak Hills. Barbara's eyebrows shot up. Really? I didn't know there were many. Well, that there was much diversity in that neighborhood. Maya took a sip of water, counting to 3 in her head before responding. My father's a cardiologist at Central Hospital, and my mother runs her own consulting firm. They moved there about 5 years ago. A doctor. Uncle Rick exclaimed, as if this somehow changed everything. Well, that's wonderful. You come from good stock then. Maya felt her face grow warm, but she maintained her composed expression. She'd been here before, the moment when people suddenly decided she was one of the good ones. It was almost worse than outright rejection. Through it all, she kept eating small bites of food she could barely taste, nodding at appropriate moments, and maintaining the pleasant smile that was starting to make her cheeks hurt. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her head. Sometimes, baby, dignity is the best response. The green beans on her plate had gone cold, but Maya kept her posture perfect and her responses measured. She'd faced tougher rooms in her corporate career. Still, she couldn't help but wonder if James truly didn't notice the undertones, or if he was choosing not to see them. More turkey, dear? Barbara asked, wielding the serving fork like a scepter. You've hardly eaten anything. We wouldn't want anyone thinking we didn't feed you properly. Maya smiled politely and declined, wishing desperately that it was time for dessert. At least then everyone could try her pie. If Barbara decided to serve it, that is. As dinner wound down, Maya offered to help clear the table, but Barbara waved her off. No, no, dear. You're our guest. Besides, we have our own system. The way she clutched the fine china made it clear she didn't trust anyone else with it. Maya watched as the desserts were brought out one by one. The apple pie, gleaming with caramel sauce. The cheesecake, topped with fresh berries. A chocolate torte that looked like it came from a fancy bakery. But her sweet potato pie was nowhere in sight. Everything looks wonderful, someone commented, and there were murmurs of agreement around the table. Maya waited, thinking maybe her pie was coming out last. But as Barbara began serving slices of apple pie, it became clear that wasn't the case. I'll just pop into the kitchen for some water, Maya said quietly to James, who was deep in conversation about his latest work project. He nodded absently, not really paying attention. The kitchen was quiet compared to the dining room's chatter. And there, sitting on the counter far from the other desserts, was her grandmother's sweet potato pie. Untouched, unserved, hidden away like something shameful. Maya stood there, staring at the pie, feeling a weight press against her chest. She thought about her grandmother's hands teaching her how to crimp the edges just right. About the love and tradition baked into every bite. About how she'd carefully transported it here, hoping to share a piece of herself with James's family. Oh. Barbara's voice made Maya jump. She hadn't heard her come in. I was just about to wrap that up for you to take home. We have so many desserts already, and I wasn't sure if everyone would. Well, you understand. Maya turned slowly, meeting Barbara's eyes. Actually, I don't understand. Could you explain what you mean? Barbara's face flushed slightly as she moved the sink, busying herself with rinsing dishes. Well, it's just that our family has certain traditions, certain standards. I didn't want to risk serving something that might not meet those standards. The words hung in the air like smoke, making it hard to breathe. Maya heard what wasn't being said. Her pie, her family's tradition, her culture, wasn't good enough for this table. These standards, Maya said carefully, her voice quiet but firm. Do they apply to the pie, or to me? Barbara turned around, water dripping from her hands. Now, don't be sensitive. This isn't about that. I just think it's better to stick with what we know. What you know, Maya repeated, without even trying something different, without giving it a chance. I'm sure it's a lovely, ethnic dish, Barbara said, reaching for a paper towel. But this is Thanksgiving. We like to keep things traditional. Maya felt a strange calm settle over her. Traditional like the Italian tiramisu I saw on the dessert table, or the French silk pie, or do those European traditions somehow count more than mine? That's not what I meant at all. Barbara protested, but her face said otherwise. I just didn't want anyone to feel uncomfortable. Uncomfortable with what, Mom? James's voice came from the doorway. Neither of them had noticed him enter. He stood there, looking between them with confusion that was slowly turning to understanding. James, Barbara started, her voice taking on a pleading tone. I was just explaining to Maya that we have certain family traditions. I heard what you were explaining, he said quietly. I heard exactly what you were explaining, and I can't believe it. Actually, no, I can believe it, and that's worse. Because part of me always knew this might happen, and I told myself it wouldn't. I told myself you were better than this. Maya watched as the realization washed over James's face, all the little moments from dinner suddenly clicking into place. All the comments and looks he'd missed or chosen not to see. It was painful to watch, but also somehow relieving. Finally, he was seeing what she'd seen all along. The pie sat there on the counter, still perfect, still untouched. A simple dessert that had somehow become so much more. A symbol of everything that was wrong with this evening. Everything that needed to change. The kitchen felt smaller now with the three of them standing there, the tension making the air thick and heavy. Maya could hear the distant sounds of laughter from the dining room, The normal family holiday sounds that felt so disconnected from this moment. Mom, James said, his voice barely above a whisper. Tell me you didn't really hide Maya's pie because you thought it wasn't good enough for our family. Barbara smoothed her perfectly pressed napkin, a nervous habit Maya had noticed throughout dinner. You're making this into something it's not, James. I was simply trying to maintain our family's traditions. Our traditions. James's voice rose slightly. What traditions exactly? Looking down on people. Judging them before you even give them a chance. Maya placed a gentle hand on James's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. It's okay, she said softly, but he shook his head. No, it's not okay. None of this is okay. He turned back to his mother. Do you know how long Maya spent making this pie? Do you know it's her grandmother's recipe, passed down through generations? But you didn't even ask about that, did you? Barbara's face flushed red. I just thought, well, with everyone here, and the way we usually do things. The way we usually do things, James repeated, letting out a bitter laugh. You mean the way you usually pretend everything different from us is somehow less than. I've watched you do it all evening. Every little comment, every look. I just didn't want to see it. Maya felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not now. James, please. Barbara's voice took on a pleading tone. You have to understand. We come from a certain background, a certain society. Stop. James's voice was firm. Just stop. Listen to yourself. Do you even hear what you're saying? What you're implying about the woman I love? The word love hung in the air between them. Maya felt it wrap around her heart, giving her strength. I've worked hard to build this life, Barbara said, her voice cracking slightly. To maintain our family's position in the community. You can't expect me to just. To just what? James interrupted. Accept someone different. Someone who might make your country club friends uncomfortable. Is that really more important to you than your son's happiness? The kitchen door swung open, and James's teenage cousin walked in, stopping short when she felt the tension. I wanted to try the sweet potato pie everyone was talking about. Barbara looked like she'd been slapped. Everyone was talking about. Yeah, the cousin continued, seemingly oblivious to the tension. A bunch of us were wondering why it wasn't served. Aunt Linda said she saw it in here, and it looked amazing. Maya watched as something shifted in Barbara's expression. Maybe the realization that her attempts to hide the pie had only drawn more attention to it. Or maybe it was seeing the hurt in her son's eyes, the disappointment that seemed to age him right there in the kitchen. I can't change who I am, Maya said quietly, speaking for the first time in several minutes. And I wouldn't want to. I'm proud of who I am, of where I come from, of my family's traditions, including this pie. If that's not good enough for you, then it's your loss, Mom, James finished. Because Maya is part of my life. She's going to be part of this family, whether you like it or not. And if you can't accept that, then maybe we need to rethink our family traditions. The silence that followed was deafening. Barbara stood there, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the counter, looking between her son and Maya as if seeing them both for the first time. In that moment, Maya thought about all the times in her life she had to be strong, to stand tall in the face of prejudice both subtle and overt. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't standing alone. The pie sat on the counter between them all. No longer just a dessert, but a symbol of something much bigger, of tradition and change, of acceptance and growth, of love that demands better from the people around it. The kitchen door swung open again, this time bringing in James's sister and a few other younger relatives. They stopped short, sensing the heavy atmosphere in the room. What's going on? James's sister asked, looking between her brother's angry face and her mother's pale one. We could hear voices. Mom decided Maya's pie wasn't good enough to serve, James said, his voice tight with emotion. Apparently, It doesn't meet our family's standards. His sister's eyes widened, then narrowed as understanding dawned. Are you kidding me? She turned to her mother. Mom, please tell me this isn't what I think it is. Barbara opened her mouth, then closed it again, looking increasingly uncomfortable as more family members crowded into the kitchen. The perfectly controlled facade she maintained all evening was crumbling. Well, I want to try it, James's teenage cousin announced, breaking the tension. She moved to the counter where the pie sat. It looks amazing, and I'm tired of having the same boring desserts every year. Me too, another cousin chimed in. My roommate in college used to make sweet potato pie. It was incredible. Maya watched in astonishment as several of the younger family members gravitated toward her pie, their interest genuine and untainted by prejudice. James's sister grabbed plates from the cabinet, shooting an apologetic look at Maya. I'm so sorry, she whispered as she passed. Some of us have been trying to drag this family into the 21st century for years. The first slice was cut, releasing the warm aroma of sweet potatoes and spices into the kitchen. Maya held her breath as James's cousin took the first bite. Oh my God, she exclaimed, eyes widening. This is amazing. The spices. It's like nothing I've ever tasted before. In a good way. Others tried it too, each bite followed by genuine sounds of appreciation. The kitchen filled with questions about the recipe, about Maya's grandmother, about family traditions. Barbara stood frozen, watching as her carefully maintained control of the evening slipped away. Her own children and their cousins were choosing sides, and they weren't choosing hers. You know what? James's sister said, between bites of pie. This is exactly what our holiday dinners have been missing. Something new, something different. Something that makes us think beyond our little bubble. I agree, another relative added. We can't keep pretending the world stops at the edge of our neighborhood. Times are changing, Mom. We need to change too. James wrapped his arm around Maya's waist, pulling her close. She could feel the tension leaving his body as more family members spoke up in support. This pie, he said, looking directly at his mother, is more than just dessert. It's Maya sharing her family with ours. It's an offering of love and tradition. And you tried to hide it away like it was something shameful. Barbara's hands trembled slightly as she reached for a small plate. The kitchen went quiet as she cut herself a slice of the pie. Maya watched, hardly daring to breathe, as James's mother took a small bite. Surprise flickered across Barbara's face. Surprise and something else. Perhaps the realization that her prejudices had almost cost her not just a wonderful dessert, but something much more valuable. This is, she paused, looking down at the plate. This is really quite good. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But in the slight tremor of Barbara's voice, in the way she couldn't quite meet Maya's eyes, there was the beginning of something. A crack in the wall of prejudice she'd built around herself. My grandmother would be happy to share the recipe, Maya said softly, extending an olive branch. She always says good food has a way of bringing people together. The kitchen was quiet for a moment, then filled with gentle laughter and more requests for pieces of pie. Maya felt James squeeze her hand, and when she looked up at him, his eyes were shining with pride and love. In that moment, surrounded by a mix of supportive faces and uncertain ones, Maya realized that change doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it comes in small moments, in shared slices of pie, in young voices speaking up for what's right, in the slow but steady breaking down of old barriers. The drive home from Thanksgiving dinner was quiet, but not the uncomfortable silence of earlier. Maya watched the streetlights blur past, thinking about everything that had happened. Her pie plate, now empty and wrapped carefully in foil, sat in the backseat, a reminder of how the evening had turned out so differently than expected. I should have seen it sooner, James said suddenly, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. All those little comments during dinner, the looks, the way they treated you. I guess I didn't want to believe my own family could be like that. Maya reached over and placed her hand on his arm. Sometimes it's hardest to see the flaws in the people we love, she said softly. Don't be too hard on yourself. As they stopped at a red light, James's phone buzzed. It was his sister. Just wanted you to know. Big family discussion after you left. Mom's crying in her room, but the good kind of crying, I think. Change is hard for her, but she's trying. More messages started coming in from various family members. His teenage cousin sent a photo of herself with an empty pie plate, caption reading, "Best dessert ever. Can we get the recipe?" Another cousin wrote a long apology for not speaking up sooner during dinner. Even Uncle Rick, who had been quiet during the kitchen confrontation, sent a brief but meaningful message. Your girlfriend showed real class tonight. We could all learn something from that. Pull over, Maya said suddenly, noticing James's eyes getting misty as he tried to read the messages at the next stoplight. He guided the car into an empty parking lot. As soon as the car stopped, James let out a deep breath he seemed to have been holding all evening. I'm so sorry, he whispered, his voice cracking. You deserved better than this. Better than having to prove yourself to them. Maya unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to face him fully. Listen to me, she said firmly. What happened tonight? It's not just our story. It's happening in homes across the country, in different ways, to different people. The important thing is what we do with it. Half my family is texting to apologize, and the other half is asking for your grandmother's recipe, James said with a weak laugh, wiping his eyes. And that's how change happens, Maya replied. Not all at once, but in small moments. In shared meals. In young people speaking up. In older people learning to see things differently. James's phone buzzed again. This time, it was his mother. I behaved poorly tonight. The pie was delicious. More importantly, I saw how happy you are with Maya. I have some learning to do. Would you both come for coffee next weekend? Maya read the message over his shoulder, feeling a complex mix of emotions. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was a start. A door being opened, even if just a crack. You don't have to say yes, James said quickly. After how she treated you. Actually, I think we should go. Maya interrupted. Your cousin wants the recipe. I'll bring my grandmother's recipe book. Your mom wants to learn. Let's give her that chance. James stared at her in amazement. How are you so strong? Maya thought about her grandmother, about all the women in her family who had faced far worse than a hidden pie and came through it with their dignity intact. Because that's what my family taught me. We don't let other people's prejudices define us. We rise above them. As they sat there in the quiet parking lot, more messages kept coming in. Family dynamics were shifting. Conversations were starting. Something had broken open tonight, but maybe it needed to break so something better could grow in its place. You know what this means, right? Maya said with a small smile. Next family dinner, I'm bringing 2 pies. James laughed, a real laugh this time, and Maya felt the last of the evening's tension melt away. They had faced something difficult together and come out stronger. It wasn't the end of the story. There would be more uncomfortable moments, more learning to do on all sides, but it was a beginning. 3 weeks after the Thanksgiving dinner, Maya sat in her office, staring at her computer screen. She'd been trying to write this blog post for hours, attempting to find the right words to share her experience. Finding love, finding voice. My journey through a family dinner. Read the title on her screen. The cursor blinked steadily, waiting for more words to follow. Her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a photo from James's sister, Barbara, in her kitchen, covered in flour, attempting to make sweet potato pie. The caption read, "Third attempt this week. Mom's determined to get it right before Sunday dinner." Maya smiled, remembering their coffee meeting the weekend after Thanksgiving. Barbara had been nervous, stumbling over her words, but genuine in her desire to do better. She asked questions about Maya's family, her work, her life. Real questions this time, not the loaded ones from Thanksgiving dinner. The office door opened, and her best friend poked her head in. Still working on that post. Yeah, Maya sighed, gesturing to the mostly blank screen. I want to get it right. This isn't just my story anymore. Her blog, started almost on impulse after that Thanksgiving night, had quickly gained attention. What began as a personal reflection on navigating interracial relationships had grown into a platform for dialogue. People from all over were sharing their own stories of family tensions, cultural misunderstandings, and paths to acceptance. Maya turned back to her keyboard and began to type. Sometimes change comes in unexpected ways. Sometimes it comes through a pie that wasn't served, through voices that finally speak up, through hearts that slowly open to new possibilities. 3 weeks ago, I walked into my fiance's family home carrying more than just a dessert. I carried hopes, fears, and generations of tradition baked into a simple sweet potato pie. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Barbara. Dear Maya, made another attempt at the pie. It's not quite like yours yet, but I think I'm learning. Not just about baking, but about a lot of things. Thank you for your patience with me. Maya felt tears prick at her corners of her eyes as she read the message. She thought about how much had changed in just 3 weeks. James's teenage cousin had started a diversity club at her high school. Uncle Rick had begun having conversations with his golf club about their membership policies. Even Aunt Linda, who'd been so cold at Thanksgiving, had called to ask about Maya's grandmother's other recipes. Turning back to her blog post, Maya continued writing. Change isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as a family recipe being shared, a tradition being passed on, a barrier being broken down one slice at a time. My grandmother always said that food has a way of bringing people together. But now I understand it's more than that. It's about what happens when we're brave enough to share our authentic selves, when we stand firm in who we are, and when others are willing to open their hearts and minds. She paused, thinking about the upcoming Sunday dinner at Barbara's house. This time, she wasn't just bringing pie. She was bringing her parents, too. Barbara had insisted, saying it was time their families really got to know each other. In the end, Maya typed, this isn't just a story about a pie or even about one family dinner. It's about the courage to be yourself in spaces that weren't built for you. It's about the power of standing your ground with dignity. It's about how love, real love, demands growth from everyone it touches. She glanced at the photo on her desk, taken last Sunday. She and James, his family and hers, all gathered around Barbara's dining room table. The same table that had felt so unwelcoming at Thanksgiving now held 2 families becoming one, sharing stories, learning from each other. And sometimes, she wrote in her final paragraph, the sweetest changes start with something as simple as a pie that wasn't served. Because in the end, it's not about the traditions we keep. It's about the new ones we're brave enough to create together. Maya sat back, reading over her words. Her phone buzzed one more time. James, sending a heart emoji and a reminder about dinner with both their parents this weekend. She smiled, thinking about how far they'd all come, and how far they still had to go. But this time, they were walking that path together, one step at a time, one meal at a time, one understanding heart at a time.